Few controversies ignite faster today than the call to boycott or the demand to cancel. A brand is targeted, a speaker dropped, a contract revoked, a platform severed, and instantly the arguments flare. For some, these refusals are vital tools of accountability, ways for communities to defend values and impose costs on misconduct. For others, they are coercive acts of repression, weapons of intimidation that erode open exchange. What makes these disputes so volatile is not simply that refusals cause harm. It is that each side sees the same act in opposite moral registers. A boycott can be described as democratic voice or as mob rule. A cancellation can be cast as rightful autonomy or as censorship from above. Supporters emphasize freedom of expression and association, but critics see coercion and abuse of power. This double vision raises sharper questions. Are boycotts and cancellations truly different, or are they just the same act dressed in rival stories? Why does refusal look virtuous when practiced by allies, yet tyrannical when practiced by opponents? And if the method is always coercive withdrawal, what does that imply about the legitimacy we attach to it? Begin with the mechanism. A boycott and a cancellation are not two distinct species, but one act, organized refusal. In both cases, a party withdraws participation to impose costs on a target: lost revenue, lost employment, lost distribution, and lost reputation. We will not buy and we will not employ differ only in the locus of decision. The structure is coercion through exit. From this starting point, the debate changes shape. If the acts are structurally identical, why do they appear morally opposed? Because the arguments are not truly about mechanics. They are about the rightful origin of refusal. When refusal flows upward, consumers or workers acting in concert, it is cast as participatory. When refusal flows downward, owners, managers, or regulators exercising veto, it is cast as proprietary. The same instrument acquires opposite meanings depending on who plays it. The decisive difference is not the act itself, but where it comes from. A boycott initiated by many is defended as public voice, a kind of dispersed check on concentrated power. Meanwhile, a cancellation imposed by the few is defended as autonomy, the prerogative of property holders to associate or not associate as they choose. Each framing assigns moral value by source, not by structure. Mass refusals are treated as noble when seen through the participatory lens, while elite refusals are treated as noble when seen through the proprietary lens. The symmetry becomes apparent when each side flips its judgment the moment the origin shifts. Refusals differ in how they unfold. Boycotts are diffuse and cumulative. They gather force gradually, as participation grows and the costs mount over time. Cancellations, by contrast, are concentrated and immediate. A single decision by a manager, publisher, or platform can terminate a livelihood overnight. This difference in tempo, slow aggregation versus sudden edict, shapes perception. Boycotts appear deliberative, while cancellations appear abrupt. So, both are structurally the same, refusal, but with a coercive effect behind it. Where that refusal happens in the value chain really matters too. Elites control those upstream choke points, like employment, publication, funding, and distribution. Meanwhile, the masses, they have power at the downstream end, through things like consumption, attention, and participation. Because those choke points are fewer and thicker, elite refusals often end up looking systemic and much harder to escape. Mass refusals, on the other hand, are spread out among loads of actors, so they seem more reversible. What might look like a moral difference is, quite often, just an artifact of where the refusal is actually lodged. Refusals also differ when it comes to reversibility. A consumer boycott, for example, might just fade away if people lose interest, letting the target bounce back. But an elite cancellation can be pretty much final. Jobs ended, contracts cut off, distribution pulled. Because the costs of getting it wrong are so uneven, elite refusals seem especially perilous. Supporters of participatory action point to this imbalance as evidence of concentrated overreach, while defenders of proprietors insist it's simply the necessary price of autonomy. The truth is, both sides face a cascade of consequences once refusal triggers reputational or institutional contagion. Both boycotts and cancellations are, at their core, attempts to enforce norms by exclusion. The real difference lies in branding. Boycotts frame themselves as norm contestation, sort of insurgent challenges to entrenched power. Cancellations, though, present themselves as norm enforcement, acting as guardians of standards or reputations. Each claims necessity. Boycotts are framed as holding elites accountable, and cancellations as defending communities against harm. Yet the roles can reverse easily. A movement that captures a choke point quickly shifts from contestation to enforcement, and an institution seeking public legitimacy may advertise its enforcement as accountability to the crowd. Actors rarely hold consistently to either frame because identity and interest are intertwined. Workers and consumers identify with the public, so they valorize boycotts as democratic expression. Owners and managers identify with property, so they valorize cancellations as rightful autonomy. Each side interprets its own refusal as principled and the others as tyrannical. This identity attachment turns a contest of interests into a contest of principles, ensuring the mirror effect endures. Refusal gains power not only through direct cost, but also through expectation. A publicized boycott makes it common knowledge that continued consumption is risky, so more people join. A publicized cancellation makes it common knowledge that association is dangerous, so more institutions follow suit. Both work by shifting thresholds. Individuals act once they believe enough others will do the same. Visibility amplifies coercion, regardless of whether the refusal is participatory or proprietary. Debates often pivot to rights language. Supporters of boycotts describe them as speech, a form of expressive political participation. Supporters of cancellations describe them as association, the right not to be compelled into relationships they reject. Yet the distinction collapses on inspection. Public disassociation is expressive precisely because it is associative in the negative. To frame one liberty as exhaustive and dismiss the other is to double count the same act in different registers. At this point, the symmetry is undeniable. Boycotts and cancellations are the same act, structured through withdrawal, yet cloaked in rival languages of legitimacy. Participatory logic sanctifies the many. Proprietary logic sanctifies the few. Each has clarity in the abstract, but neither can persuade the other in practice. The divide is not a misunderstanding to be corrected by better reasoning. It's a clash of fundamental values, collective voice versus individual autonomy, plural accountability versus property control. No amount of elegance in argument can bridge that chasm. But this incompatibility forces us to look for a deeper structure, and herein lies the revelation. Refusals always operate within the same triad: self-interest, control, and harm. Whoever initiates the act, workers, consumers, managers, or owners, does so first out of self-interest, whether to defend values, reputations, or material standing. That self-interest is enacted through control, by closing off access to choke points of participation, distribution, or employment. The closure in turn produces harm, whether dispersed as economic loss to a company or concentrated as the abrupt end of a livelihood. The circuit is stable. Self-interest motivates control, executes, and harm follows. Boycotts are narrated as collective expression, a way for the many to discipline the few. Cancellations are narrated as autonomous choice, the prerogative of the few to exclude. Each side describes its own refusal as principle while casting the others as repression. Yet both are traversing the same sequence of interest, control, and consequence. This is why judgments invert so quickly. When a boycott gains control of a choke point, it is recast as censorship. When a cancellation is cheered by a crowd, it is recast as mob rule. The mirror holds because the underlying triad never changes, only the vantage point from which it is viewed. This is why public disputes over refusal so quickly collapse into accusations of hypocrisy. When one side invokes democracy, the other hears mob rule. When one side invokes autonomy, the other hears censorship. Each side has reasons, but those reasons are always pre-committed to a preferred origin of legitimacy. The rhetoric is window dressing. The real driver is self-interest. A refusal is celebrated when it protects one's camp and condemned when it harms it. If self-interest is the true determinative factor, what does that imply for judgment? It implies that any attempt to defend a refusal as principled must be treated with suspicion. The principle is almost always chosen after the fact, to dignify the outcome one already desired. To escape that corruption, one must turn away from justifying refusals in terms of what they achieve for oneself. The alternative is deceptively simple. Act in the interest of others. But even this path is fraught, for no one can know the interests of others better than they know them themselves. To presume so is only another mask for control. The only safe ground is to respect the autonomy of others to choose for themselves. One may present a perspective, make a case, and explain why one acts as one does. But one cannot demand that others adopt the same view. The refusal that compels others to bend to one's claimed principle merely replicates the coercion it seeks to resist. In the end, boycotts and cancellations reveal less about democratic virtue or proprietary right than about the inescapable entanglement of interest, power, and harm. Their rhetoric will always be mirrors, flattering those who look into them and distorting those who do not. The mature response is not to declare one mirror truer than the other, but to step back and acknowledge the reflection for what it is, a portrait of self-interest dressed as principle. If there is a way to judge whether a refusal is good, it lies not in claiming the higher principle, but in letting others choose theirs. One may speak, one may refuse, one may dissent, but having spoken, one must also let go. Only there, in the relinquishment of compulsion, is there any hope of escaping the cycle of mirrored accusations and returning the act of refusal to something other than a weapon.